what a masterpiece.
Yeah,
right?
beautiful. The stars have aligned. Like, it's amazing.
That's how it always feels, with these things is like,
Yeah.
wow, look at this, alignment. Phenomenal.
Alrighty, man. How you doing?
Yo. Sup, dude?
How are you?
Pretty good. I'm actually feeling extra good right now.
Oh, yeah?
Ask me why.
Okay, why?
Because your boy just found a new Subdomain takeover 0 day right before this call. And
Dang.
yeah, I got my homies scanning for it. They're popping left and right. I don't even do Subdomain takeovers anymore, but I just recently got back into the game just because I saw this asset that looked like it was going to be possible. So
Nice.
I'm pretty hype. It I talk about the recon game being a bit of a grind, like doing really wide recon, always having to update your tools, always having to, increase the speed and efficiency of your tools to compete with other people. But man, does it feel good when you just like pop something and you just see like vuln.
That's awesome. So is this like a whole new like class or like a whole service, or is like Shopify
Yeah,
or whatever, for example?
it's a new service. It's not, I say 0 day, and it is a 0 day, but it's not, it's not something mega technical. It's just a new service that there's not any documentation on, this service being able to be subdomain takeovered. Turn that into a verb for you. So I was pretty excited about it. It was really easy. But yeah, I think people just don't think about it from a new perspective anymore. A lot of times people will just Google, hey, can I do subdomain takeover on blah, blah, and then just stop there if there's no results. But really, you got to go pay, like we always say, man, you got to go pay the entrance fee to get access to the control panel to see if you can register the domain yourself. And a lot of times you'll take an L and you won't, and you'll pay that, $50 or whatever it was to get access to that service. But the other times, stuff will pop in it, and it's great.
Nice. Well, that's awesome, dude. That's I mean, that's just showing that the stuff we talk about, like, here it is being used in the real world.
It works, man. It works. All right.
Awesome.
Let's see what we got. So news, as far as news goes, once again, we've got a pretty good lineup today. This episode's probably going to be a little bit light. Joel and I both have some extra stuff going on this week, but we do have a decent amount of news stuff. So let's take a peek at that.
Yeah, cool. So the first thing that came up was from Noperator.
My boy, Noperator.
Yeah, Noperator. So I don't know, you may have heard, but there was a new TLD that was released, the .zip TLD. So they
that caused a whole thing on Twitter.
Yeah, so Google, if you don't know, Google owns a lot of different TLDs. Honestly, I think it's just like one of their hobbies. They just collect TLDs. So did you know they own .new as well? So
do they really?
Yeah, so you can go to docs.new or sheets.new or slides.new, and it makes
no way.
It makes like a new Google Doc or Google Sheets file or whatever. Yeah.
Okay,
so like,
what the heck, Joel? Why? Yeah, how do you know all this
It's
stuff?
crazy. I don't even remember how I found that at one point, but like, yeah. So you can do like docs.new. That's like one of my favorite ones that I use to like make new documents and stuff.
That's awesome.
But they also own .zip. They own .google. Anyways.
Wow, I feel like that's kind of a CSRF though. Like I can just create a bunch of new documents by making a request to docs.new.
Yeah, docs.new. It's
Dude,
super
hold on, wait. Did that hold on. Did that just like stick it in my Google Drive?
Yeah.
What?
But I think Google Docs, you can have like anonymous. Well, it won't autosave until you put something in it, I think.
Oh, okay.
But
I was gonna say, because if you could just like have someone come to your page, window.open docs.new like 50 times instantly and just blow up their Google Drive, that would be real annoying. It wouldn't necessarily be bad.
In real time.
Yeah, but like it would be annoying.
Yeah. So it's super interesting. But yeah, they own .zip as well, like this .tld or this TLD, and they released it to the public, so you can register domains on the .zip subdomain or
Okay,
sorry,
I'm sorry.
TLD.
You still got me on the dot.
Oh yeah, on the dot new.
Yeah. So okay. So yeah, I'm sorry. Continue. You're saying the dot zips. They have dot zip now. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So now you can register my domain.zip, and the observant listener can probably already see where this is going because .zip is for zip files. It's a very commonly used file extension out in the wild. So you can see the potential for tricking people into visiting a domain or having it at the end of a command or something. And so Noperator put together this awesome, like basically a proof of concept that shows, okay, like imagine I send you this command, this wget command. It just downloads like a zip from the GitHub releases and then it unzips it. And in the screenshot that they show, it's downloading like the zip. It looks all completely normal. You unzip it and it's got their pwned content in it. And it took me like a really long time to figure out how this worked.
Same, man. I commented on that and I was like, hey man, what the heck is going on? And he got me confused with like the way that his because he posted a command that has of ls right at the end, and it got me all hecked up because I couldn't read it because the columns were switched around from normal ls because he's using something weird. But to be honest, man, like I don't know, I kind of thought everybody was overreacting when this came out, and at the end, to be fair, it's not the biggest deal in the whole world, but definitely, when I clicked on Noperator's post here, and you scroll down here, hold on, I think it's in the doc. Hold on. Yeah, it's the second. No, I'm gonna put it in the doc for you real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. It's this. So go to that post and then scroll down to the Stack Overflow image in that post. So if you go to Noperator's post, there's a Stack Overflow image, and I would absolutely just go to that wget, double click on it, and then paste it into my terminal and press enter.
Yeah, I mean 100%. Like it's extremely like it looks like very like like it doesn't look malicious at all. It just looks like any other like set of commands or whatever that you would copy and paste from a Stack Overflow post, right?
Yeah, I really like the breakdown that he did a little bit later too, where he actually breaks it out and says, okay, the first, just by adding a space here, we're able to skip that whole GitHub section and then just make source code.zip the thing that he reaches out to.
Yeah.
So
you basically, what you just talked about there is like kind of like the little secret. So in the screenshot, it's not obvious at all. Like even in the original like tweet that they made, you don't really like understand just because of the way that the line wraps around the terminal and stuff. There's actually a space after the one URL and then followed by like he owns source code.zip, right? And so like you would expect that this would download source code.zip, but what you don't realize is there's a space and it's actually two different URLs. And since source code.zip is a valid domain now, it resolves it and then it like downloads it. And so you could just see like it's literally like one space difference, right? Like you add a space and you're pwned. So
sneaky, man, sneaky.
Yeah.
And then I bet you could actually also sort of combined this with a sort of a, what is it called? Is it Zip-Snip? Because this is a Zip-Snip, but maybe Zip. You can combine it with a Zip-Snip attack, which I think is like a path traversal in the zip files, right?
Yeah.
And then you could get arbitrary file right potentially. So there's definitely some risk here. I don't know that I would go so far as to. I mean, we'll see how the adoption goes, but I don't know that I would go so far as to just block the whole TLD.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe that's the best move, and make sure that, because at the end of the day, the big risk here is for technical people making mistakes, right? It's not a lot of times that non-technical people are running wget and stuff like that. So it's a little bit on the fringe, I would say. Still takes some user interaction, some social engineering, but definitely, maybe not the best move from a security perspective.
Yeah, and I was thinking like maybe one of the more realistic use cases for like the bug bounty side is this is probably going to come into play around like regex bypasses, URL like format or host checks and stuff like that, where maybe they're inserting just enough file name or like at the file name portion of a URL, and you could somehow terminate the URL and just turn it into a valid domain that you own. or pass a regex check that is making sure it ends in .zip or something, right? Like where normally this would be impossible, but now you can have a domain and get a redirect or something. So I think there are some creative use cases, and it's just one of those things to maybe note down in your brain, in your giant brain database that like, this is a thing that exists. Maybe I'll pull on that later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I mean, we could even use it for like almost like a link hijacking thing too. If somewhere in like a flow of, like a CI chain or something like that, there could be someone accidentally putting a space and now, between the zip file, and now you can just register that domain and then boom. So
yeah, or like converting relative URL to like a full domain or something like that.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Sweet. All right, let's see. What's the next one we got? Oh, okay. I can talk about this one. So the next one that I wanted to talk about was this post from IF Secure. I'm not even going to try to say his real name. Ivan is his first name. Fratrick. Ivan Fratrick. IF Secure. And this is actually from May 11th. So actually, yeah, this is still in this episode's sort of period. But it was recently disclosed that he found a bunch of bugs in SIP, which I think is a really cool protocol. And I think is one of the easiest protocols to sort of go after as an HTTP bug hunter. You can, if you go after SIP, it's very similar to HTTP in a lot of ways. I found some bugs in this protocol at a previous live hacking event, and it was a lot of fun. So definitely want to encourage people to go there, read through these CVEs. And these are actually really, really simple bugs too. I mean, like you said in the tweet, in the subtweet, one of them is literally just like you could fit it into a tweet. It's just like, SIP/2.0 AAAAA foo, and that gets misparsed and causes a buffer overflow.
Yeah. Worth noting, you can fit it in a tweet without a Twitter Blue subscription.
Yeah. There you go. You can fit anything in a tweet now. But nowadays, that's sad. But yeah, so definitely something to check out. And I'm just personally looking forward to the next opportunity I get, the next excuse I get to audit some C code directly. And look at, these sort of vulnerabilities, because that's not something I'm comfortable doing and not something I've done in the past, beyond, rudimentary stuff. So I think taking a protocol something that I'm familiar with, like SIP, and going and, reading the file, trying to find some vulns in a different protocol for a change could be a really refreshing route to take.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the little kind of mini goals that I've kind of set, where I think it would be really cool if to fuzz a project, like an open source project, and go from start to finish of having a crash and actually getting a full exploit on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah. Cool. So next up, we've got this awesome tweet thread from Hack Luke. This was a couple days ago on the 13th. And basically, he created a little thread that are some basically 10 tips that he recommends on how to crush your bug bounties, right? And so I think this is really relevant and has some awesome sort of crossing, trends and themes that we've talked about on our podcast in the past.
For sure.
But number one, start, right? This is it sounds obvious, right? But it's huge. You have to just take some initiative and just it seems super overwhelming and intimidating. Yeah. A lot of the people that I talk to are new hackers. One of the biggest things I hear is decision fatigue, right? They open HackerOne, they go to the programs, and there's 1,000 programs. What do you pick? What do you hack on? Who do you focus on?
Well,
what's
that's
a good
the thing
target?
too. I mean, people. Another thing is people will jump back and forth from okay, I need to do Portswigger, Web Academy, whatever that thing is, Portswigger's training thing, which is amazing and one of my top recommendations, by the way, to Bugcrowd University, to Hacker 101, to Nahamsek's channel, to Insider PhD's channel, and they just jump around, and that's great, and you absolutely need to consume that material. But you can't do that forever. Sometimes you got to get in the situation. You got to get your hands dirty. You got to make a bunch of mistakes and waste a bunch of time. That should be your goal. You can't be afraid of that. You got to get in there and say all right, for every hour I waste right now trying to hack this or not finding anything, that's another hour that I'm not going to have to spend before I find my own vulnerability. And to be honest, that sounds like a bunch of BS, but I promise you, that will provide you value in the long run.
Yeah.
So I really like that. And the reason why I threw this on the doc for this time was Yeah, we get this question. This is the number one question we get. And this podcast is not super oriented towards beginners. We may do a beginners episode at some point, but the number one DM that we both get is like, hey, how do I start in bug bounties? How can I do bug bounties? And so this is a great place to look at for any of you that are getting ready to start the process. Read through these and take a look at Hack Luke's other content, because this is a good path to get rolling.
Yeah, well, and I think what you talked about is a great strategy, just generally speaking, but also like especially for bug bounty. Bug bounty is not one of those things that's guaranteed, right? And we've talked about this a lot, where you can spend hours, days, weeks, and not find something that you would consider, even high enough to submit. And I think it's important to set those kind of like check marks or checkpoints or whatever. Like, set yourself some boundaries in terms of, okay, write it down. If I hack for 8 hours today and I find nothing, then I'm gonna do something else, or I'm gonna take this action, or plan ahead and write it down so that you can sort of frame your mind looking forward, so that when you hit that point, you're not like, all right, now what, right? Because you've already made a plan for it, and that'll help you feel like less lost and less like you haven't accomplished stuff. Yeah,
for sure, man. I think we've got it in the ideas doc, but I think we should definitely do a brain hacks episode of Critical Thinking, just kind of talking about some of the brain hacks that you need to be able to survive the bug bounty industry, because it's really stressful, man, and it's hard. It's a results for money sort of situation, which is always stressful, and it's a high FOMO situation. It's a high imposter syndrome situation. So there's a lot of mental toughness that you need to develop, which I've had the opportunity to benefit from, being around some of the people that have, gone before me and taught me some of these things at the live hacking events, but not everyone gets that opportunity. And so I think maybe we'll bump that to the top of the list for our upcoming episodes, because I think that could be really of some value.
Yeah, that's a good one. Cool. Let me just run through the rest of these real quick. Okay. Number 2, targeting fresh programs. Like we talked about, it's like, how do you pick somewhere to hack? Look for new scope, stuff that people haven't touched. That's going to be more ripe for easy findings and all that kind of stuff.
Where I just found that bug today.
Yeah, exactly. Focus on your strengths, right? So this is like, if you want to find something, you want that satisfaction, don't be like, let me learn about mobile for the first time. And like, you might find a vuln that way, but like, if you know how to web hack, just do some web hacking. It's going to be easier. You're going to have less nuance, and less, you're not going to have to be going back and Googling all this stuff so much. It'll be a lot easier.
Yeah. And so just I'll jump in and comment on that one while we're here. So I definitely agree with this, but I agree with this more for the beginners of hacking, right? Like, and if you're a web dev, you should find web vulns. If you're a mobile dev, you should find mobile vulns. And we've talked about this in the past as well. If you can, hack a product that you use, hack a product that you are actively using as user, and you'll find that things will go a lot easier for you. All right, continue. Yeah, sorry.
For sure. No, absolutely. I appreciate the input. Number 4, use automation wisely. We have a whole episode about this, like when to automate and like where to draw that line. And I totally agree with Hack Luke. Before, if you want to save yourself some time, like, you can automate stuff, but you have to be aware that it can often lead to, false positives, fake findings, all that kind of stuff. So you really need to supplement it in there to save yourself some time, but don't waste your time by then having to check all those results, like and double check it and not trust it and all that kind of stuff.
Or modify the script time and time again. Like I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, it definitely becomes a thing, and I've recently also, I used to be just my own tools sort of guy. Like I ran, besides stuff like, mass DNS, which I'm not going to go write everything in a low level language and stuff like that. I would mostly use my own tools, designed the way that I wanted them and that sort of thing. But lately I've really gained an appreciation for specifically project discovery tools with HTTPX and DNSX, and just essentially very Linux, what is Linux? I can't think of the word in English that I'm trying to say. The flow of how Linux does it, right? Yeah. Flow of those tools, where you can pipe stuff back, into other tools and the way that they connect together. And so I think that's really cool as well. Being able to use other people's tools effectively and build that into your own flow, and not always having to build your own stuff, because that definitely will become a time drain.
Yep. Cool. So number 5, practicing on vulnerable apps. I think I'm a little bit conflicted about this one because we've had some discussions about this, I think, off the air about like, new hackers and stuff. Again, I have lots of friends and people who are getting into hacking, and they're like, oh, I was spending, a bunch of hours like doing damn vulnerable web app or hack the box. I'm like, that's awesome. But you should like, I would encourage you to like, now that you've got like your hands around sort of the basics and you've got some ideas, go do some real hacking, like go do some bug bounty. Like,
absolutely.
I don't want to say it's a waste of time because it's not. Like, it's a learning experience, right? And like, I think CTFs and that type of like structured vuln that like, it exists, you just have to figure out how to exploit it. It's great practice. However, if you're really trying to optimize your time and like use it efficiently and get like that real world experience, jump into bug bounty as soon as you can so that you can really like start to look at real apps and less of these sort of set up structured preconditioned scenarios.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Number 6, read reports from other hunters. I would put this right on par with reading blog posts and like, making bookmarks and doing your own research and all that kind of stuff. It also goes really well with the next one, which is engaging with the community. I think like staying in tune with what's going on within both just the general security community as well as bug bounty community on Twitter, on blogs, on Discord, on
CCBB
Slack.
podcast.
On the Critical Thinking Bug Bounty podcast. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, like any of those types of methods. Like the fact
like
that you're listening,
shouting out our podcast on our podcast.
On our podcast. Yeah. The fact that you're listening to this right now, like, already tells you
you're already doing it right.
Yeah, you're in there. You're engaging with the community. You're reading/listening to reports, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. This is like a great way to get that kind of firsthand knowledge from like, like otherwise, how are you going to find this stuff? Like, it's really, really hard. This was one of the things that I think a lot of bug bounty hunters struggle with, is finding this kind of information out there, like openly and freely, and in a way that's accessible for them to read and understand.
Yeah, for sure. So document everything. That's the next one. That's number 8. We talked about that a little bit. I don't do it so well, but I've realized after we did that episode talking about that I actually do it a little bit more than I thought. So, especially when I'm leaving a target and I'm, holding those work-life balance boundaries really well, when I say, okay, you know what? Ding, 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 alarm's going off. It's 4:45 or whatever. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes cleaning up my home directory and documenting all my stuff and, knowing where I left off, brain dumping my attack vectors and that sort of thing. And I think also working with you in the last event made us do that a little bit better too. We got our own little hackmd.io notes up, and we're dumping sort of potential leads in there. So I think that was really good. But it's definitely not something that I don't know. I wouldn't put that in like the top. Maybe it makes the top 10. Maybe it makes the top 10.
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say the same thing. This is something I'm not the greatest at and haven't been the greatest at historically. But starting since like the last event, I've been getting better at it, and I think finding a good system, whether that's HackMD or something else, to like help you structure notes in a way where it's not quite brain dumping, but it's a little more organized, right?
Yeah.
And like some way to structure that brain dump. I think I've seen a couple tools. I can't remember what they are, but HackMD is really like the first one that comes to mind. And I think something like that is a great idea, even if it's just local markdown files. And not HackMD, but like whatever you want to do to just take notes so that you have someplace you can search and reference back is a great idea.
Yeah, my brain just automatically writes markdown anyway. I can't even use Google Docs anymore. It just has to be marked down. So be persistent and enjoy the process of the last 2. And that's something that I kind of wanted to talk about recently, because I do get, like I mentioned before, I do get all these messages on like, hey, how do I do this? What should I do? How do I hack? I had a conversation with a guy. I'll give him a shout out here if I can find his name. It's Pranshux OX. And I was talking to this person, and they were saying, hey, should I pivot to a different program? Tell me exactly what to do. And this is what I told him. I told him, hey, go to your target, spend 4 hours using the application and writing down every single attack vector you can think of in as minute detail as you can possibly think of. Then go back and test every single one of those very thoroughly. Think about when you think you've tested it, think about it again and make sure you have tested it properly from every single angle. And he did that, and he found some bugs, and I was really happy to see that. And then he said, hey, I found some bugs, but to be honest, I feel like I'm getting through, everything that I can find, on this target. And I said, that's perfect. That's where you want to be. Now, answer me this. Do you know that API better than any other bug bounty hunter? Do you know that API better than the devs that wrote that API? No? Then stay there. Do not pivot just yet. Because really the way you get some of these crazy vulns is by becoming a mega expert on these things. You should see some of the guys, I won't shout them out specifically because I'm not sure how much information about their flow they want to give out, but like some of the top hackers on very singular programs, you go and see them, and they have literally built full applications around documenting the API and how the authorization structure works on these applications. So they literally have built an application to help them document the application of their target. Like that's the kind of badass, like I'm totally addicted to this, like concentration that you need to find crazy bugs and destroy a target. So definitely agree with Luke's topic here on being persistent and enjoying the process. That's another thing, is just being naturally curious, not stressing too much about, hey, am I finding vulns, am I not finding vulns, but trusting the process and enjoying it along the way, and you'll have better results that way for sure.
Yeah, that persistence thing, that's something we've talked about, and I couldn't agree more. Like deep dive, like go deep as you possibly can, because that's where you're going to start to make some of those like key connections like in your brain, like, oh, I wonder if this thing is accessible through this other endpoint or whatever. And finding those hidden endpoints in the JavaScript or in the mobile app or whatever, like, figuring out different ways to map that API as good as a developer can. I think that's like really one of those key things that makes the difference between like the number 1 on the program and the number 3, 4, 5.
Totally agree, man. Okay, cool. So definitely check out Hack Luke's Twitter thread. We'll put it in the description. Yeah. The next one that I wanted to talk about is a link tweeted out by Mokuso, Mokuso4 on Twitter. And he tweeted out a link to Asset Note, an article that they published recently on bypassing IIS authorization. I love the title. You definitely know Shubs just went to Google. It's like how to write a clickbaity title. Right? Bypass ISS authorization with this one weird trick. Like, I love it. And he got 3 RCEs. So no big deal. For what he can't do in clickbaity titles, he definitely can do with the hacking. No, but this write up is like is a masterpiece, man. I was just talking to Joel about it before the episode. Just stunning. And I'm really glad that it popped up today. And I'm actually glad we put it at the end of our... so you actually also had something else you want to talk about, right? Shadow clone. So let's go jump to that first, and then we'll come back to this blog by Asset Note, because I want to talk to that in the context of the source code review stuff that we're going to do after that. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, so it's basically, two a double whammy, both from Shubs here, InfoSec AU. And so Shubs tweeted out a couple weeks ago, maybe like 2.5 weeks ago at the end of April, that he had spent a couple hours, working with this tool called Shadow Clone. And he said that, once you get everything set up and you get your Python env matching the runtime Python env, everything basically works outside of the box. And you can use HTTPX, which is a tool that we've talked about before.
Heck yeah, Project Discovery.
Yeah, 100%. Really awesome tool to scale your scanning out across, a ton of different instances. And he said he did 150,000 subdomains in 3 to 4 minutes. That's pretty awesome. And if you look at this project, it's called Shadow Clone. And I had never heard of this until Shubs tweeted it out. But essentially, it's inspired and very similar to Axiom and Fleeks, which are 2 other kind of like distributed, VPS type like task running solutions that exist. But the big difference, at least that's claimed within these docs, I haven't tested this myself, is that 1, you can have like 10 times more instances, up to 1,000 instances. It's mostly free compared to essentially pricing per instance and per minute with Axiom. And it's faster. and it's basically free. Like
Nice.
there's no idle cost. Yeah. So
There you go.
I may have said it's mostly free twice.
we're emphasizing that
Yeah.
point. Very good.
Again, mostly free. Yes. So
That's what it literally says in the docs too. Mostly free.
mostly free. Yes. And the mostly is like, technically there are limits like in the millions on how many like calls you can make. But the way that this works is it uses these dynamic like serverless functions to run your task. So it'll take your input file, it'll split it line by line, and then it'll distribute it among a bunch of different instances. And it's uses like free tier instances and all that kind of stuff. So it basically costs nothing again. And I mean, it seems really, really awesome. Kind of similar to Fireprox, which we were talking about maybe a week or two ago, that is kind of like this, but just for like the request side, where it puts it through an API gateway. So I think this is a really awesome tool. It's certainly more flexible than the Fireprox stuff that we talked about. And I think it's a really awesome way to distribute your scanning, so you're not taking down services.
I really like that it supports the different. It supports Google, AWS, and Azure too. I think that's pretty rad.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, cool. Let me just I'm just gonna clone this down right now before I forget, because I'm gonna forget if I don't do it. Okay, cool. So yeah, going back to what I was talking about before. Like you said, double special today for Shubs, killing it always with the content. So yeah, the reason why I wanted to butt this right up to our conversation about source code review is because it's pretty much a masterclass in source code review. And I think this just reinforces the point that Hack Luke made in the post of just making sure you're religiously reading the posts by respected hackers, that you admire. And Shubs is the top of that list for me. He really is. And so, and this extends not only to people that are trying to learn or get into the space, but also to top hackers. We have to stay on top of this stuff and continue reading. And it's just become sort of a memory, a muscle reflex now. Anytime I see anything like this come out, that I've got to get through it. So the list does get kind of long and overwhelming sometimes, but once you get into it, it's really valuable. Okay, so last week we talked a little bit about VS Code and how to use it and that sort of thing. And we addressed some of the stuff that we wanted to get to with source code review, but we talked about how to get access to source code. We talked about, Docker containers, NPM libraries, leaks on GitHub, trying to get free trials of software. And now you've got the source code, maybe you pull it from an LFD, maybe you do one of those things. But what do you do with the source code after you've gotten it? So that's what we want to spend some time talking about today. And this article by Shubs, I think outlines a really good flow. And let me just kind of break that down for us real quick. Let me get some water before I do that, because my throat's gonna.
And I just wanted to echo a masterclass might even be understating it, just because I don't think if I were to tell somebody how to do source code review, it would be much better than what Shubs is doing here, because Shubs is doing exactly the types of stuff that we're talking about in terms of how to analyze what you're dealing with, how to figure out attack surface, how to figure out how stuff works, all that kind of stuff. And all of the asset note blog posts are incredibly detailed, in depth, really walking you through how they're thinking about it, what tools they're using, mentality, all of it, right? And so that type of insight is really, really useful. And I mean, seriously, go read it. But I'll let you. Yeah, let's walk through.
So all right, cool. So we'll walk through this. But first, Joel, I want you to tell the people, what is a source? What is a sink? Because those two terms are very important to this flow, and I think they're the two most important concepts in source code review.
Yeah, so a source and a sink, right? So it might be kind of straightforward if you think about it, but a source is where you're starting and a sink is where you're ending. And so in source code, what that really means is a source is something like an input parameter, or maybe a request handler would be your source function. And then the sink is going to be the function that returns a response to the HTTP server, or maybe a database
a database call
execute call or
Yeah.
a cursor execution or a query something, right?
Yeah.
That's your sync. So basically starting from some place, some path, syncing in another place.
Right. So when we do source code review, the reason sources and syncs are really important is because they're the two best places to start from. So you've got two primary paths that you can go, right? You can start at a sync and say, okay, I want to be able to control data getting passed into this function. And so for a great example of a good sync would be the Python exec function or the Python subprocess popen function or execute functions in C, and just think about any sort of template injection. Anytime you're dealing with a place that you would want to inject to cause a file write, for example, those would all be great examples of syncs. So you've identified these places where you want to get your data. The reason why you want to get your data there is because you can pivot and gain greater access control, right? So for example, if we were able to go after the sync popen and we can get in Python, then we may be able to get our malicious input in there, and then we could execute system level commands, which allows to shell the server. And so that's a great example of a sync. Now, a source, like you said, Joel, that's where we're getting our user data coming in, right? And this is another popular place to start from. So you can either start with the sync and work backwards to the source, or you can start at the source and work forward to the sync. Joel, which one do you, if you had to pick, I know that we both do both, but if you had to pick one, which one do you think is like the way to go with?
So personally, I like starting with syncs. But like you said, like you have to do both, because starting with syncs can be really great, but it's also very frustrating if you keep tracing them back and there's no source and you don't know what your sources would look like. So understanding where the syncs are and like finding them can also be a challenge, because it's like an unknown number of syncs, right? Like there's infinite possibilities.
Could depend on the application.
Yeah.
We just did a source code review where the target used calls to the command line a lot. And unfortunately, they encapsulated all of that into one function, and that function was secure. But if we hadn't known about that sync, if we hadn't tracked down that sync and then sort of traced it back, then we wouldn't have been able to audit all the paths. And actually, at the end of the day, Joel, we actually did find one vulnerability that got paid out using that. So I feel pretty good about that.
That's true.
But yeah, so I really like that point, is that one of the tricky parts about syncs is there's not and there are some lists out there. It's like, all right, here are the syncs for PHP or whatever. But they're not all going to be the same all the time. And so getting to know your syncs in the application could be a really good exercise in source code review.
Yeah. And then, like you said, take your syncs, understand sort of how they work, how they're structured, where they might be living within the code base, and then try and figure out your sources. So where are HTTP functions being handled? Where does inbound data come in? And then see if there's any way to connect the two. Do they ever interact? Is there any sort of middle frameworks where they might be talking with each other? Are there any ways that you could maybe use some open-ended side of the application behavior to get your way over to that sync? And just trying to identify any way to connect those two. I think it's really hard to go completely from one to the other without doing a little bit of both.
Yeah, for sure, man. I totally agree. But I will say I am in the opposite boat. If I had to pick one, I would start with sources. And the reason for that is because a lot of times syncs have to do with stuff like RCE or command injection or arbitrary file write or configuration file injection, which we'll talk about soon. Fun vulnerability there. But they don't necessarily always include business logic stuff. And those are still relevant to the application, even though we are, a lot of times when we're auditing source code, we're going for the prize. We're trying to get RCE, trying to find deserialization or some of those other bugs I mentioned. But I think tracing the sources allows me to understand the application a lot better when I'm first getting into it. So I often start with identifying all the places where I can trigger something in the application to happen. And then I'll sort of trace those down the paths and try to map out, what sort of logic flow it has, what if statements, what functions are being called. and then use that to understand the application. And then once I sort of understand the application, having mapped out a lot of those paths, then I can kind of say, okay, well, maybe I've got the sync, and then maybe I can work backwards from there. But if I had to pick one of the two, I think I would start with the sources.
Yeah, and I think like that approach is also like completely reasonable because understanding your attack surface is highly important, right? It's just like I talked about, like you don't have to go from the syncs. If anything, going from the sources probably makes a little more sense because you're hunting for things that are reachable, and you're at least able to understand like where your data is going from the edge inwards versus trying to find some way out from deep within, right? And so I think like it just depends on maybe what you're looking for or what your time constraints are, or if you have a ton of syncs, it might not make sense to go through every single one. It might be easier to just start with the sources and go from there.
The sources, starting with the sources definitely takes more time. I think if you're trying to find a quick RCE or a quick bug, then it might be best to work from syncs backwards. But then if you start from sources, you can also try to find areas where authorization breaks down and have business logic impact. So I think that's another cool route, like you said. Okay, so the way that I wanted to sort of, so I wanted to break that down for y'all, just kind of have that conversation, make sure we understand the terminology of sources and syncs. Quick editor's note before we get into the next section. The article that we're talking about was released by AssetNote, which is a company owned by Shubs, but the actual author of the article was an AssetNote employee by the name of Dylan Pinder. Dylan is also tremendously skilled. I've heard Shubs talk about him in the past, so sorry for the misattribution, Dylan. Great work on the write-up and great work on the bug. All right, cool. With that cleared up, back to the show. And then I also kind of wanted to talk about how this correlates to Shubs' write-up and how he actually uses one of my main tricks for, it's not really a trick, it's just how you find the stuff, to find sources. And what he does, if you look in the reconnaissance section of the write-up, he one of the first things he does is he looks at trying to find all the files that he can access. And then he says, unfortunately, we couldn't find much of them. And so then he goes and looks in the web.config file, which shows the routing for the application. So this is an extremely important piece. You have to understand how your application, well, actually, we can even take a step back, right, Joel? We can say not even routing at this point, what services are running on the application, right? What are on the target? You might be interacting with an IoT device, you might be interacting with something else, but what kind of services are running? Are there internal services running behind a reverse proxy? Are there services running on different ports that you can't even hit from, various interfaces that you could use to pivot? Having an understanding of that flow, I think, is extremely important, and that should be the first place to start. And then once you've identified the services, you can get into routes and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think like this is one of the best approaches because you're starting from like the very beginning, right? You're looking at the configuration file.
It's a very good place to start.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
Sorry, I went all like nursery rhyme mode there. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I just think like configs are a great place to start, because like how does it work? How is it configured, right? And go from there. That's a great source of truth.
Yeah, for sure. So what he does here is he takes a look at the web config file and the site core config file, and he finds the ways that various requests are being routed, and what kind of paths you can hit in the application. And then, he mentions it's a little bit further down. Let's see if I can find it in the write-up. But he does an excellent job of, we'll get to that when we get to it, but essentially bypassing an authentication flow. And actually, this proves one of my theories wrong that I was going to tell you guys about this week, but I think I'll change my thought on this before I, with Shub's write-up. I would normally say that you should try to understand the auth scheme and then understand whether you're trying to find auth or unauth vulnerabilities, and then go look at the unauth scope if you're trying to find unauth vulnerabilities, right? But really, that's a fallacious assumption because the further you understand the auth and how the auth is working there, then you may be able to find bypasses like he does in this situation. So he actually looked at auth and unauth scope and then figured out a way to, sort of get around the auth flow that the application was implementing to access some functionality. So that was really impressive. And so just to sort of walk through this flow, he looks at the site core config file and the web config file. He identifies how the application is routing various requests. And then he is taking these DLL files out. He's decompiling them, with DN spy, like we mentioned. That's not the one that you recommend, right?
Yeah, I recommended .peak. DN Spy is a little bit older, and I think it's actually not in active development anymore. However, it does allow you to do debugging specifically, which I think is one of the reasons why the asset note team decided to use this, because you can set breakpoints within running apps without the source code, and then you can hit those breakpoints and make sure that like what you think is happening is actually happening. And so that's super, super useful for figuring out if your exploit is working, and if it's not, why not, and all that.
Yeah, I've done that in the browser, but that is actually something I've never done, and something that I do want to do in something that I'm reverse engineering is, load it up into something where you can set breakpoints and stuff like that. And there are very specific situations where you can do this. You can do it in Java, a decompiled Java, and you can do it in, and obviously in .NET here, like what they've got. But that I think that's really cool. So then what he does is he identifies this sitecore.mvc.dll file, and he identifies how various things are being routed. He identifies /API/sitecore/controller, so that this is the controller variable, and /action. So now he's opened up to himself a scope that's really important. And Joel, this is kind of the thing like what we did with I'll bleep it later with. Was when we found the endpoint where the endpoint, we knew that this is where we needed to get access to functionality, and then we made it our mission to get to that point where we could access those routes to open up the scope, right? So it's not necessarily, our hacking isn't necessarily always focused on like, how do I get to this sink, but also expanding the scope that you can have access to. And I think that's something you did a really good job of in the past event. Was we found that target that we needed to get access to, and then you were able to find a way to get access to that, which expanded our scope so much, allowed us to test so much more source code, and really opened it up. So that's the same sort of thing he's doing here. He's identifying a way to trigger different functions within the application, and then he's being able to use that to sort of weave through the application and hit various endpoints. The routing in this application is really funky.
Yeah.
And so he uses that to eventually get RCE through leaking a file, a web config file, and that file contains the keys for good old Noperator that we mentioned earlier, his Telerik exploit, which came back in 2019, which is used all the time. Excellent exploit, because that enabled him to use that exploit because the encryption keys are stored in the web.config file. So that resulted in RC via deserialization through what was really an LFD,
right,
which we talked about last time as well.
Yeah, and just an awesome just like a great way to show chaining different parts of the application, really going deep and understanding these separate moving parts and how they connect together, and then tying it all into one big, putting a nice little bow on it and handing the team this beautiful POC that does everything all together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out, and let me just go ahead and note down what time we said the things that we need to bleep out really quick, because I hope I don't forget to do that. But yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to point out was this was behind auth, right? Like I mentioned before. And so what he does then is he continues to look for a way to bypass auth here. And the way that he ends up doing that is by looking very closely at this.context user identity is authenticated check, right? So how is that being generated? And after deep diving into that and looking into sort of how that functionality is created, he found that, and I love this. This is such a great hack, dude. I love it, right? Because when you have a user and it's something like is authenticated, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to be a user at some point. Not necessarily, because what he finds is that there's some functionality surrounding mailing lists. And let me just go ahead and read the line. It says Sitecore could be configured with a renderer user to enable a user who is subscribing to a mail list to access information without having to log in when they view the email. So when they've clicked on the link from their email. freaking brilliant. And then when viewing these items, I'm just going to finish reading this. When viewing items this way, the user provides some query parameters such as EC_message_ID and EC_ID, which tells Sitecores the details of the email item they are viewing.
Oh,
and
how nice.
You know what that freaking does? That configures the user property on the application to be the user that the renderer user, and bypasses the is authenticated check, which allows you to access some of this functionality.
So
and I'm just
crazy.
like, what a masterpiece.
Yeah,
right?
beautiful. The stars have aligned. Like, it's amazing.
That's how it always feels, with these things is like,
Yeah.
wow, look at this, alignment. Phenomenal. So really, just to review really quickly here, what Shubs does is he looks through the routes, understands how the application is routing, expands his scope by getting access to this API/Sitecore, and then being able to define the controller in the actions, audits the code in the controller that's in the actions, finds a sync that we didn't really talk about too much, but was essentially a preview functionality that allowed him to pass in a parameter, which led to local file disclosure, and used that LFD to disclose the web.config file, which contained the encryption keys, which he could use for a known CVE by Noperator himself to get a deserialized RCE, and then made that a sort of a semi-unauthenticated bug by abusing the is authenticated check, which can be sort of spoofed by subscribing to a mail list and then clicking a link from the mail list, which will generate these EC message parameters that can be used to get your your current user authenticated user to be rendered a renderer user rather than just no user.
Right.
QED.
I mean, just like, yeah, crazy. Like, just like
Phenomenal.
an amazing like combination of different bugs and different like pieces of knowledge throughout the application, and just well done to the Asset Note team. Incredible.
Amazing. Route expansion, or route, understanding the routes, expanding your scope, finding your sync. Those are some major pieces of this, some major takeaways from this article. The flow that he had there. So Anyway, really cool that came up this week when we were wanting to talk about that, the sources and syncs thing. And we spent a lot of time already talking about doing an in-depth talk on a vulnerability. So I think we'll save any report summarization for next time if that works for you, Joel.
Yeah, I think that's all good. Okay.
Sweet.
All right, we'll call it there.
All right,
Catch you
sounds
next
good.
week.
That's the pod.
Peace.
Yo, I've recorded this outro so many times. This one's going to be the last one. I'm done. If you enjoyed the episode, please head over to YouTube, find our channel at Critical Thinking Podcast, and drop us a subscribe. Also, on your podcast app of choice, just subscribe, please. And we don't want you to miss an episode. We want to keep hanging out. Finally, if you could tell someone about the podcast, that would be amazing. That would make my day. Tell your friend, tell your weird neighbor, tell your hacker chats, tell anyone who will listen. Go to ChatGPT and tell ChatGPT about Critical Thinking Bug Bounty Podcast. All right, guys. See you next week. After having so much fun recording these outros, I figured I'd throw a couple bloopers in for y'all at the end. Enjoy. And drop a like, subscribe, whatever, there. Hack. Yo, thanks for listening to this episode of Critical Thinking Bug Bounty Podcast. If you enjoyed, head over to YouTube and drop a like and subscribe. And also subscribe on your YouTube. Nope.